He dragged his thumb across her collarbone, tracing the jagged crescent scar hidden beneath her silk dress. For a second, his touch was impossibly gentle. Then his pulse hitched. Without his sight, his hands were his eyes, and they just told him the woman bleeding for him was his executioner. The penthouse on Lakeshore Drive smelled of old money, rain, and the faint metallic tang of impending violence. Chicago was a city of ghosts, and Valerie Quinn had come to make one more. To the heavily armed men guarding the elevator banks, she was Dr. Abigail Miller, a world-class rehabilitation specialist recruited from Northwestern Memorial Hospital. Her credentials were flawless, meticulously forged by the Irish syndicate run by Declan O'Connor. Her medical bag contained a standard blood pressure cuff, a stethoscope, and specialized eye drops. It also contained a custom-molded ceramic syringe, entirely invisible to the metal detectors, filled with an untraceable potassium chloride solution. It would stop a human heart in less than 30 seconds, mimicking a massive natural cardiac arrest. Valerie adjusted her glasses, a prop to soften her sharp, predatory features, and stepped out of the private elevator. The double mahogany doors swung open. "Arms up, Doc," grunted Tommy, a bruising enforcer with a cauliflower ear and a tailored suit that barely contained his bulk. He ran a wand scanner over her body. It beeped at the zipper of her skirt, but nowhere else. "He's in the study. Make it quick. He's not in a good mood today." "Noted," Valerie said smoothly, her voice a practiced, soothing alto. She walked down the long, dimly lit corridor. The walls were lined with original Modigliani paintings, but the man who owned them could no longer see them. Leo Santoro, the head of the Santoro crime family, sat by the floor-to-ceiling windows. 6 months ago, a rival faction had planted a car bomb under his armoured Mercedes Maybach. Leo had survived, but the explosion had showered his face with shattered glass and intense heat, permanently destroying his optic nerves. The underworld had celebrated, assuming a blind Don would be a weak Don. They were wrong. If anything, the darkness had made Leo more paranoid, more ruthless, and far more dangerous. He had purged his own ranks, executing half a dozen capos on mere suspicion. Declan O'Connor knew a direct assault would fail. Leo had to be taken out quietly from the inside. Enter Valerie. "You're stepping heavily on your left foot," a deep raspy voice echoed through the sprawling study. "An old injury, or are you just nervous, Doctor?" Valerie paused. Leo didn't turn his head. He was staring straight ahead at the storm brewing over Lake Michigan. He wore a crisp white dress shirt, the sleeves rolled up to reveal forearms corded with muscle and faded ink. A pair of dark, expensive aviator sunglasses hid his ruined eyes. "Neither, Mr. Santoro," Valerie replied, walking toward him, forcing her gait to even out. "I'm wearing new shoes. Leather takes time to break in." Leo chuckled, a dark, vibrating sound. "Sit." Valerie set her bag down on the glass coffee table and took the leather armchair opposite him. She could see the faint, silvery scars framing his jawline and temples, the remnants of the blast. Despite the damage, he was striking. He radiated a raw, lethal magnetism that made the air in the room feel heavy. "Give me your hand," Leo commanded softly. Valerie hesitated for a fraction of a second, then extended her right hand. Leo reached out. His movements weren't fumbling or uncertain. He moved with eerie precision, his large, calloused hand wrapping around her wrist. His thumb pressed firmly against her radial artery. He sat there in silence for 10 agonizing seconds. Valerie controlled her breathing, entering the zen-like state she used before a kill. 62 beats per minute, Leo murmured, tilting his head slightly. For a civilian meeting the boss of the Santoro family in his private sanctuary, that is remarkably calm. Most doctors I hire are sweating before they even step out of the elevator. "I focus on my patients, Mr. Santoro, not their reputations," Valerie lied smoothly. "I'm here to assess your spatial awareness training and administer your nerve treatments." "Good," Leo released her wrist. "Because I don't need a friend. I need someone who doesn't shake when they hold a needle." Over the next 3 weeks, Valerie became a permanent fixture in Leo's dark, insulated world. She played the part of Dr. Miller perfectly. She guided him through advanced echolocation techniques, helped him map the penthouse using acoustic cues, and administered the pain-relieving eye drops to soothe his chronic migraines. But the assassination proved complicated. Leo was never truly alone. Tommy or Big Al were always hovering near the doorway. Moreover, Leo's paranoia meant he never consumed anything he hadn't personally verified, and he slept in a fortified panic room. She needed him vulnerable. She needed him to trust her completely. To win a monster's trust, you had to let him think he was taming you. Valerie began to intentionally let small human flaws slip into her perfect facade. She allowed her breath to hitch when he stood too close. She let her voice soften with feigned empathy when he suffered from phantom pains in his eyes. And slowly, the impenetrable Don began to lower his guard. He started dismissing his guards when she arrived. "Wait outside, Tommy," he would say, pouring himself a measure of Macallan 25-year-old Scotch by sound alone. The doctor doesn't like an audience. It was the perfect opening. But as the days bled into weeks, Valerie found something terrifying happening to her. The cold, mechanical distance she always maintained with her targets was fracturing. She watched Leo navigate his darkness with fierce, unyielding pride. She saw the moments of quiet frustration when he dropped a pen or bumped a chair that had been moved out of place. She listened to him play the grand piano in the dead of night, haunting beautiful sonatas that spoke of a profound, agonizing loneliness. One evening, while she was checking his blood pressure, Leo suddenly reached out and brushed a stray lock of hair behind her ear. His fingertips were warm, grazing the sensitive skin of her neck. "You smell like gunpowder and jasmine, Abigail," he whispered, his face inches from hers. A strange combination for a doctor. Valerie's heart skipped a beat. "I went to a shooting range this morning," she recovered quickly. "Living in Chicago, a woman living alone, it pays to know how to protect oneself." Leo smiled, a slow, dangerous curving of his lips. "If anyone ever tries to hurt you, you tell me. I'll make sure they never draw breath again." The sincerity in his voice felt like a physical blow. Valerie swallowed hard. She was the Viper. She had killed 16 men for the O'Connor Syndicate. She didn't feel guilt. But as she looked at the blind Mafia boss, she realized she hadn't reached for the ceramic syringe in her bag for over a week. She was stalling. And in her line of work, hesitation was a death sentence. A torrential thunderstorm hammered Chicago, rattling the reinforced glass of the penthouse. It was past midnight. Valerie was supposed to be off duty, but Leo had requested her presence. The severe drop in barometric pressure triggered excruciating migraines in his damaged optical nerves, and the thunder drowned out the subtle auditory cues he relied on to navigate, leaving him disoriented and agitated. She found him pacing the study like a caged panther. The power had flickered out 30 minutes ago, plunging the penthouse into absolute darkness. The backup generators had engaged, but only for the security systems and emergency lights in the hallways. The study was pitch black. For Valerie, the darkness was an inconvenience. For Leo, it was a terrifying equalizer that stripped away his control. "Leo," she said softly from the doorway, dropping the formal Mr. Santoro they had maintained in front of the guards. He stopped instantly, his head snapping toward her voice. "Abigail, you shouldn't be here. The city grid is down. The streets are dangerous." "I'm not leaving you in this," she said, stepping into the room. She used her phone's flashlight to guide her to the leather sofa. "Sit down. Let me give you the injection. It will take the edge off the migraine." He complied, sinking heavily into the sofa. His chest was heaving, his usual iron-clad composure fracturing under the relentless pain. Valerie sat beside him, opening her medical bag by touch. She bypassed the lethal ceramic syringe, her fingers brushing past it, and pulled out the genuine painkiller. As she prepared the needle, a massive crack of thunder shook the building. Leo flinched, his hand shooting out blindly and gripping her knee with bruising force. "I hate it," he breathed, his voice raw. "I hate not knowing what's in front of me. I hate being a victim in my own house." "You're not a victim," Valerie said fiercely, surprising herself with the intensity of her own voice. She administered the shot into his shoulder, then gently placed her hand over his trembling fingers. "You survived a hit that would have destroyed anyone else. You're the strongest man I know." Leo turned his face toward her. In the dim glow of the lightning flashes illuminating the windows, he looked entirely broken and devastatingly beautiful. "Why are you so good to me, Abigail?" he whispered. "Because you need me to be," she replied softly. He leaned in. Valerie didn't pull away. The scent of his scotch and expensive cedarwood cologne enveloped her. When his lips met hers, it wasn't the demanding, violent kiss of a Mafia boss. It was hesitant, searching, desperate for an anchor in his endless sea of black. Valerie kissed him back, a wave of forbidden warmth flooding her chest. It was a mistake, a massive, fatal mistake. She was crossing the one line she had sworn never to cross. But as his hands moved to her waist, pulling her flush against his chest, she surrendered to the current. Leo's hands were exploratory. For a blind man, touch was everything. It was how he saw the world, how he memorized the shape of it. His palms slid up her sides, tracing the curve of her ribs through the thin fabric of her silk blouse. He was committing her to memory. She allowed it, lost in the heavy, intoxicating rhythm of his breathing. His hands moved up, slipping beneath the collar of her blouse to stroke her bare shoulders. Then, his fingertips hit the raised, jagged flesh on her left collarbone. It was a crescent-shaped scar, thick and ugly. Valerie froze. 3 years ago, in a rainy alleyway in South Boston, a hit had gone wrong. The target had been a Santoro enforcer, one of Leo's most trusted hitmen. The man had fought like a demon. He had pinned Valerie to the asphalt and driven a broken whiskey bottle into her collarbone, twisting the jagged glass before she managed to put a bullet through his eye. The wound had required 40 stitches. It was a unique, horrific scar. Leo's thumb stopped moving. The tender, searching quality of his touch vanished instantly. His fingers became rigid, analytical. He traced the exact curve of the crescent. Valerie's heart slammed against her ribs. "Pull away!" her instincts screamed. "Run!" But she couldn't. She was paralyzed. Leo's hand didn't stop there. Moving with sudden, chilling purpose, his hand slid down her left arm. He bypassed the smooth skin and found the puckered circular scar on her deltoid. A bullet grazed from a 9mm, sustained during a shootout in Miami 2 years ago. He mapped her scars like a scholar reading a cursed text. A thin slice across the ribs, a burn mark on the back of her left shoulder. To a normal man, they were just injuries. To the head of the Santoro family, who read autopsy reports and hit squad debriefings like morning newspapers, they were an undeniable signature. The Santoro syndicate had a file on the O'Connor's top assassin. They called her the Viper. The file described a ghost who left no fingerprints, but it detailed the injuries she had sustained from their men over the years. A crescent scar from a broken bottle in Boston, a 9mm graze in Miami. Leo's thumb rested heavily on the crescent scar on her collarbone. The air in the room seemed to freeze. The thunder outside was suddenly muted by the deafening roar of silence between them. Valerie slowly slipped her right hand down, her fingertips grazing the opening of her medical bag. The ceramic syringe was exactly 4 inches away from her hand. He knows. Her brain fired. He knows exactly who I am. But Leo didn't shout for his guards. He didn't reach for the Glock 19 she knew he kept wedged between the sofa cushions. Instead, he slowly withdrew his hand from her collarbone. His face was an unreadable mask of shadows in the dark room. The vulnerability from moments ago was gone, replaced by a cold, terrifying serenity. "You have lived a dangerous life, Dr. Miller," Leo said, his voice dropping an octave, slipping into a silken, lethal purr. "I've had my share of accidents," Valerie replied, her voice remarkably steady, though her fingers curled around the ceramic syringe in the bag. Leo leaned back against the sofa cushions, turning his head slightly toward the window, as if watching the storm. A slow, dark smile crept onto his lips. It wasn't the smile of a lover. It was the smile of a predator who had just realized the prey had walked directly into his jaws and locked the cage behind them. Accidents, Leo repeated softly, tasting the word. Fascinating things, accidents. They leave such specific marks, such undeniable histories. He turned his face back toward her, his dark glasses reflecting the sudden flash of lightning. Even without eyes, she felt him staring straight through her soul. Tell me, Abigail, he whispered, the name sounding like a threat. When you're fixing someone who is broken, how do you know when it's time to stop healing them and time to finally put them out of their misery? Valerie's fingers tightened around the cool ceramic barrel of the syringe hidden inside her bag. Her thumb hovered over the plunger. The distance from her hand to Leo's jugular was less than 2 feet. In the dark, even with his heightened reflexes, she could plunge the needle into his neck before he drew the Glock from the sofa cushions. When the poison is the only thing keeping the body together, Valerie answered, her voice dropping its soft, melodic disguise, replacing it with the flat, deadened tone of the viper. Leo didn't flinch at the change in her voice. Instead, he chuckled, a low, raspy sound that rumbled in his chest and competed with the rolling thunder outside. He reached into his suit jacket. Valerie tensed, ready to strike, but his hand emerged holding not a weapon, but a folded piece of heavy parchment paper. And 2 days ago, Leo began, his voice devoid of the vulnerability he'd shown just minutes prior, my private fixer in D.C., Thomas Cavanaugh, a man who charges $250,000 just to answer the phone, intercepted an encrypted wire transfer routing through the Cayman Islands. It was a payout, $5 million. Valerie's blood ran cold. The exact amount Declan O'Connor had promised her for the Santoro contract. The money didn't go to an offshore account owned by a ghost, Leo continued, turning his sightless face toward her, the lightning reflecting off his dark lenses. It was routed to a shell corporation owned by Sean Gallagher, Declan O'Connor's right-hand man. Tell me, Valerie, why would O'Connor pay his own lieutenant the bounty he promised his best assassin? The name, her real name, hanging in the air shattered the last illusion of the doctor. Valerie dropped the medical bag. The syringe lay exposed on the leather cushion between them. Because he's tying up loose ends, Valerie breathed, the terrifying arithmetic of the underworld clicking into place. Exactly, Leo said, his voice a lethal purr. O'Connor knows you're a perfectionist. He knew you'd infiltrate, isolate, and wait for the perfect moment. But he never intended for you to walk out of this penthouse alive. You're the sacrificial lamb. You kill me, and his men who have already bought out my security kill you. They pin my assassination on the rogue Viper. O'Connor takes my territory, and he doesn't have to pay his most expensive contractor. Valerie stared at the blind Don. He had known. He had traced her scars, pieced together the intelligence from Thomas Cavanaugh, and deduced her true identity. Yet, he had let her administer a needle to his shoulder just moments ago. He had kissed her. If you knew who I was, Valerie whispered, her hand moving away from the syringe and hovering near the Sig Sauer holstered at the small of her back. Why didn't you have Tommy put a bullet in the back of my head the moment I stepped off the elevator? Leo leaned forward, invading her space, the scent of expensive scotch and raw, predatory danger washing over her. Because Valerie Quinn, in a house full of traitors, the woman sent to kill me was the only one honest enough to look me in the eye and hate me to my face. Your scars tell the truth. My men just tell me what I want to hear. He reached out, his hand finding her jawline, his thumb brushing her lower lip, and because I wanted to see if the Viper had a heart left to steal. Before Valerie could process the heavy, intoxicating gravity of his words, the heavy mahogany doors of the study blew open with a deafening crash. The dim emergency lights from the hallway spilled into the room, illuminating 3 massive silhouettes. Tommy, Big Al, and a third enforcer named Rossi stood in the doorway, their silenced submachine guns raised. Sorry to interrupt the romance, boss, Tommy sneered, his thick Chicago accent dripping with malice. But O'Connor sends his regards. And Doc, he said to tell you your severance package is a closed casket. Valerie didn't think. Instinct, honed by a decade of violence, took over. She didn't dive for cover. Instead, she threw her body over Leo's, driving the blind Don flat against the leather sofa, just as a volley of suppressed gunfire chewed through the backrest where his head had been a fraction of a second before. Feathers and shredded leather exploded into the air. "Lights out, Valerie," Leo roared beneath her. He didn't reach for his gun. He reached for the heavy crystal Scotch decanter on the coffee table and hurled it with terrifying precision toward the hallway door. It didn't hit the men. It smashed directly into the emergency lighting relay panel on the wall. Sparks showered the corridor, and the entire penthouse plunged into absolute suffocating darkness. "My house," Leo's whisper ghosted against her ear, sending a shiver down her spine that had nothing to do with fear. "My rules!" The darkness was a physical weight. For Tommy and his crew, it was blinding. For Valerie, it was a severe tactical disadvantage. But for Leo Santoro, it was just Tuesday. "Spread out!" Tommy barked, his voice laced with sudden panic. The beam of a tactical flashlight clicked on, cutting frantically through the black. But the beam was narrow, easily giving away the shooter's position. Valerie rolled off the sofa, drawing her Sig Sauer. But before she could line up a shot on the flashlight beam, Leo's hand clamped around her ankle, pulling her down behind the massive solid oak desk. "Don't shoot," Leo breathed, pressing her back against the wood. "Muzzle flash gives you away. Let them hunt ghosts." Footsteps crunched on shattered glass. "Come on, boss," Big Al taunted, his heavy boots thudding against the Persian rug. "You're blind. You can't hide from us. Make it easy." Leo closed his eyes beneath his dark glasses, his head tilting. He was mapping the room, triangulating the sound of their breathing, the rustle of their tactical vests, the squeak of their rubber soles. "Al is 10 feet to our left, near the piano," Leo whispered, his lips brushing Valerie's ear. "Rossi is by the fireplace. Tommy is holding the door. Take Tommy." Valerie nodded in the dark, slipping a sleek carbon steel throwing knife from her boot. "What about Al?" "Al's mine," Leo said coldly. He slipped his suppressed Glock 19 from his holster. He didn't stand up. He merely shifted his weight, aiming the barrel of his weapon through the gap between the desk and the floor, pointing it toward the grand piano. He waited for a thunderclap to mask the sound. Crack! The thunder rolled, and Leo pulled the trigger twice. A heavy thud followed instantly as Big Al's 250-pound frame hit the floor, dead before he realized he was bleeding. "Al!" Rossi yelled, his flashlight beam whipping wildly toward the piano. The light illuminated Al's body, and in that split second of distraction, Valerie moved. She vaulted over the right side of the desk, silent as a shadow. Rossi swung his weapon toward her movement, firing a burst that shattered a Ming vase next to her head. But Valerie wasn't his target. She threw the knife with deadly torque. It buried itself to the hilt in Rossi's throat. The enforcer dropped his gun, clutching his neck as he collapsed, the flashlight rolling across the floor, casting eerie, spinning shadows across the room. Only Tommy remained. The big enforcer panicked, firing wildly into the dark, sweeping his weapon back and forth. Bullets tore through drywall and shattered the remaining windows. Rain and wind howled into the study, turning it into a chaotic maelstrom. Valerie was pinned behind a leather armchair. She was out of throwing knives, and using her gun would invite a spray of bullets. Suddenly, from the darkness behind Tommy, a towering figure rose. Leo had moved with impossible silence, navigating his own home flawlessly. Tommy spun around at the sound of a footstep, raising his gun, but Leo was faster. The Don didn't use his gun. His large, scarred hand shot out, grabbing the barrel of the submachine gun and wrenching it upward. With his other hand, Leo drove a brutal, practiced strike directly into Tommy's windpipe. Tommy choked, dropping the weapon. Leo grabbed the enforcer by the lapels of his suit and slammed him against the mahogany wall. "You forgot, Tommy," Leo hissed, his face inches from his treacherous guard. "I don't need to see you to know exactly how to break you." With a sickening crack, Leo snapped the enforcer's neck. Tommy slumped to the floor, lifeless. The penthouse fell completely silent. save for the wind howling through the broken windows and the heavy rain drumming against the floorboards. The spinning flashlight slowly came to a halt against the baseboard, casting a dim, dramatic beam across the carnage. Valerie stepped out from behind the armchair, her gun still drawn, her chest heaving. She looked at the bodies of the 3 traitors, then up at the blind Mafia boss standing amidst the ruin of his sanctuary. He was unhurt, breathing heavily, adjusting his cuffs with terrifying calm. He turned his head toward her, guided by the sound of her breath. "Are you bleeding, Valerie?" he asked softly. "No," she replied, lowering her weapon. She looked at the medical bag on the sofa, the lethal ceramic syringe still resting innocuously on the cushion. She walked over, picked it up, and deliberately snapped the needle in half. She tossed the pieces onto the floor. Leo heard the snap. A slow, genuine smile spread across his scarred face. He walked toward her, moving confidently until his chest brushed against hers. "Declan O'Connor is a dead man," Leo murmured, his hands finding her waist, pulling her flush against him. "But he has a private army. You can't take him alone." "I never work with a partner," Valerie whispered, looking up into his face. "I'm not offering a partnership, Viper," Leo said, leaning down, his lips brushing against the crescent scar on her collarbone that he had traced earlier. "I'm offering an empire. You be my eyes. I'll be the sword that slaughters everyone who ever betrayed you. We take Chicago together." Valerie felt the raw, magnetic pull of the man. She'd come to this penthouse to kill a monster. Instead, she had found the one person in the world whose darkness perfectly matched her own. She reached up, her hands tangling in his dark hair, pulling his face down to hers. "Deal, boss," she whispered, right before she kissed him, sealing a vow in blood and shadow that the underworld would never forget. Did you love this dark, twisted romance? The story of the Viper and the Blind Don doesn't have to end here. Their ruthless takeover of the Chicago underworld is just beginning, filled with more explosive betrayals and steamy, high-stakes passion. If you want to see Valerie and Leo conquer their enemies and build their empire together, smash that like button, share this story with your fellow dark romance lovers, and subscribe for part 5. Drop a comment below on what they should do to O'Connor,